The final months of Queen Elizabeth II's life. From the triumph of her, the months following the Platinum Jubilee revealed the true genius of Queen Elizabeth II's approach to aging while reigning. Rather than viewing her physical limitations as insurmountable obstacles, she transformed them into opportunities to demonstrate new forms of royal effectiveness that would become a masterclass in leadership adaptation for leaders worldwide. The summer of 2022 marked the beginning of what palace insiders would later describe as the Queen's Renaissance period, a time when she redefined what it meant to be an aging monarch in a rapidly changing world. This wasn't about denying the realities of being 96 years old, but about finding innovative ways to fulfill her constitutional duties while honoring the physical boundaries that age imposed. Her approach to mobility challenges became particularly instructive. Instead of canceling engagements when walking became difficult, the Queen worked with her staff to redesign events around her capabilities. State receptions were restructured so that she could greet important guests while seated in comfortable positions. Garden parties were modified to include strategic rest areas that allowed her to participate without exhausting herself. These adaptations maintained the dignity and effectiveness of royal occasions while acknowledging practical limitations. The Queen's use of walking sticks and mobility aids provided a powerful example of how public figures could address aging gracefully. Rather than hiding these necessary tools, she made them part of her public image, demonstrating to millions of older Britons that using assistance didn't diminish one's dignity or effectiveness. Her walking sticks, often specially designed to complement her outfits, became symbols of practical adaptation rather than frailty. Technology played an increasingly important role in the Queen's evolved approach to royal duties. Video calls, which had been emergency measures during the pandemic, became permanent fixtures of her working methods. She used these digital tools not just for convenience, but as ways to expand her reach beyond what would have been physically possible through traditional methods. Military units stationed overseas, charitable organizations in remote locations, and international dignitaries could now receive direct royal attention without the physical strain that travel would have required. The Queen's mastery of virtual engagement surprised even technology experts who worked with the palace. Her comfort with video calls and digital presentations reflected not just adaptation to necessity, but genuine interest in using new tools to enhance her effectiveness. She approached technology with the same systematic thoroughness that had characterized her approach to traditional royal duties, ensuring that digital engagements maintained the same standards of preparation and protocol as in-person events. Her relationship with the press evolved during this period in ways that reflected her sophisticated understanding of modern media demands. Rather than reducing her media exposure due to physical limitations, she worked with communication staff to develop new formats that showcased her continued mental acuity while accommodating her physical needs. Carefully planned interviews and photo opportunities provided evidence of her ongoing engagement without subjecting her to the physical demands of lengthy public appearances. The Queen's approach to delegation during this period demonstrated remarkable wisdom about leadership transition. Instead of simply reducing her workload, she began sharing responsibilities in ways that trained younger family members while maintaining her essential constitutional functions. This wasn't retirement by stealth, but strategic development of royal capacity that strengthened the institution while allowing her to focus her energy on duties that required her unique experience and authority. Prince Charles, as heir apparent, found his role subtly expanded during this period, but always in coordination with rather than replacement of his mother's activities. The Queen maintained firm control over key constitutional functions while allowing Charles to take on additional ceremonial duties that prepared him for future responsibilities. This careful balance preserved the Queen's authority while providing practical training for succession. Prince William and Catherine's increased visibility during this period also reflected the Queen's strategic approach to royal development. She used their growing popularity and energy to extend royal reach while maintaining her own position as the family's undisputed leader. Their activities complemented rather than competed with her work, creating a multi-generational approach to royal duties that maximized impact while managing individual limitations. The Queen's continuing involvement in government business during this period surprised constitutional experts who had expected her to reduce her political engagement. Her weekly audiences with successive prime ministers remained substantive discussions rather than ceremonial meetings. Her deep knowledge of government operations, accumulated over 7 decades, made her an invaluable resource for political leaders navigating increasingly complex challenges. Her approach to the constitutional crisis that developed during Liz Truss's brief tenure as Prime Minister demonstrated the value of her continued engagement. The Queen's steady presence provided stability during a period of rapid political change, and her experience proved invaluable in ensuring smooth transitions during governmental uncertainty. Her death just days after meeting with Truss highlighted how essential her constitutional knowledge remained even in her final weeks. International diplomacy remained a priority for the Queen throughout this period, as she recognized that her unique status as the world's longest-serving head of state gave her unparalleled influence in global affairs. Her meetings with world leaders, even when conducted virtually or in modified formats, carried weight that younger royals couldn't match. Foreign diplomats frequently noted that audiences with the Queen provided access to historical perspective and practical wisdom that was unavailable elsewhere. The Commonwealth realms particularly benefited from the Queen's continued engagement during this period. Her role as head of state for multiple nations required careful attention to diverse political and cultural contexts, attention that she maintained despite physical limitations. Virtual meetings with Commonwealth leaders became regular features of her schedule, allowing her to provide guidance and support without the exhausting travel that traditional diplomacy would have required. The Queen's approach to health challenges during this period provided inspiration for millions of people facing their own aging processes. Rather than hiding her limitations or pretending they didn't exist, she demonstrated how to adapt gracefully while maintaining purpose and effectiveness. Her example showed that aging didn't require withdrawal from meaningful activity, but could instead prompt creative approaches to continued engagement. Palace staff noticed that the Queen's intellectual curiosity remained as sharp as ever during this period. She continued reading voraciously, staying informed about domestic and international developments with the same thoroughness that had characterized her approach throughout her reign. Her questions during briefings remained incisive, and her memory for details impressed even longtime advisors who thought they knew her capabilities. The Queen's final public engagements demonstrated her remarkable ability to maintain royal dignity while acknowledging physical realities. Her last major public appearance, the opening of Parliament in May 2022, required significant accommodations, including the use of a wheelchair for parts of the ceremony. Rather than diminishing the occasion, these adaptations highlighted her determination to fulfill her constitutional duties regardless of personal comfort. Her approach to the opening ceremony revealed the sophisticated planning that characterized all her activities during this period. Every aspect of her participation was carefully choreographed to minimize physical strain while maintaining the ceremony's constitutional significance. The result was an event that honored both tradition and practical necessity, demonstrating that royal protocol could evolve without losing its essential meaning. The Queen's final meetings with political leaders, including her last audience with a prime minister just 2 days before her death, exemplified her commitment to duty that continued until the very end. These meetings weren't merely ceremonial but involved substantive discussion of government business, proving that her constitutional role remained active and meaningful throughout her final months. Her death on September 8, 2022, came not as the culmination of a long decline, but as the sudden end to a period of remarkable renewal and effectiveness. The woman who had seemed diminished by age and loss in 2021 had spent her final months demonstrating that true resilience isn't about avoiding challenges, but about how magnificently one responds to them. The legacy of her final period extended far beyond royal history to provide inspiration for anyone facing the challenges of aging while maintaining purpose and responsibility. Her example showed that physical limitations need not define one's capabilities, and that wisdom and experience could compensate for diminished energy when properly applied. Her approach to this final phase of her reign established new standards for how leaders could age gracefully while maintaining effectiveness, creating a template that would influence public figures for generations to come. The Queen's final season of service became a masterpiece of adaptive leadership that honored both human limitations and the enduring power of dedicated service. The Platinum Jubilee of June 2022 was supposed to be a nostalgic farewell, a gentle celebration of a remarkable reign that was gracefully drawing to a close. Instead, it became the stage for one of the most stunning displays of royal resilience in British history, as Queen Elizabeth II transformed what many expected to be a swan song into a triumphant demonstration that reports of her decline had been greatly exaggerated. The months leading up to the Jubilee had been carefully orchestrated by palace staff, who understood that this celebration needed to strike a delicate balance. It had to acknowledge the Queen's remarkable achievement of 70 years on the throne while managing public expectations about her physical capabilities. Behind the scenes, detailed contingency plans were developed for every possible scenario, from the Queen's full participation to her complete absence from public events. What emerged, however, exceeded even the most optimistic projections of palace planners. The Queen approached the Jubilee preparations with an energy and attention to detail that reminded longtime courtiers of her approach to major events during the prime years of her reign. She insisted on personally reviewing plans for every major celebration, from the Trooping the Color ceremony that would officially open the festivities to the final Platinum Jubilee pageant that would close the four-day celebration. The Queen's hands-on involvement in planning revealed a sophisticated understanding of how the Jubilee could serve multiple purposes beyond simple celebration. She recognized that the events provided an opportunity to demonstrate the monarchy's continued relevance to contemporary British life while showcasing the institution's ability to evolve with changing times. Every detail, from the integration of diverse performers in the pageant to the inclusion of community organizations in local celebrations, reflected her vision of a monarchy that belonged to all Britons. The opening ceremony at Trooping the Color on June 2, 2022, provided the first public indication that something remarkable was happening. The Queen, who had missed several recent public engagements due to mobility issues, appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony looking refreshed and engaged. More significantly, her body language and demeanor suggested a woman who was fully present for the occasion, not simply fulfilling a ceremonial obligation. The careful choreography of the balcony appearance revealed months of detailed planning that accommodated the Queen's physical needs while maintaining the dignity and spectacle expected of such occasions. The timing of her appearance was calculated to maximize her energy while minimizing physical strain. The selection of family members who joined her reflected both tradition and practical considerations about providing support while maintaining the visual impact of the moment. International media coverage of the Jubilee's opening day reflected surprise at the Queen's apparent vitality. Foreign correspondents who had traveled to London expecting to document the final major celebration of an aging monarch instead found themselves reporting on a sovereign who seemed renewed by the occasion. The contrast between the frail figure many had expected and the engaged, alert Queen who actually appeared was so striking that it dominated news coverage worldwide. The service of Thanksgiving at St. Paul's Cathedral on June 3 provided another opportunity for the Queen to demonstrate her remarkable comeback. While she ultimately decided not to attend the service due to mobility concerns, her absence was handled with such grace and strategic communication that it actually reinforced rather than undermined perceptions of her continued competence. The decision to prioritize her energy for other Jubilee events showed a sophisticated approach to managing her physical limitations while maintaining her essential royal functions. The Queen's surprise appearance at the Paddington Bear sketch that opened the Platinum Party at the Palace concert represented perhaps the most brilliant stroke of the entire Jubilee celebration. The pre-recorded video, featuring the Queen having tea with the beloved children's character, demonstrated a willingness to embrace humor and popular culture that contradicted stereotypes about her being out of touch with contemporary Britain. The creation of the Paddington sketch revealed extraordinary attention to detail and personal involvement that surprised even the production team. The Queen's comfort with the informal format and her perfect comic timing in the video suggested someone who remained mentally sharp and emotionally engaged with her role. The moment when she pulled a marmalade sandwich from her iconic handbag became an instant classic that was shared millions of times across social media platforms. The video's global reach demonstrated the Queen's understanding of modern communication methods and her willingness to adapt her image for contemporary audiences. The sketch reached demographics that traditional royal events rarely touched, particularly younger viewers who might otherwise have little interest in royal celebrations. This strategic use of humor and popular culture revealed a monarch who remained relevant to 21st century Britain while maintaining the dignity and mystique that had always characterized her reign. The Platinum Party at the Palace concert on June 4th provided the Queen with another opportunity to surprise observers with her stamina and engagement. Her appearances throughout the evening, including lighting the principal beacon that triggered the illumination of Jubilee beacons across the Commonwealth, showed careful energy management that allowed her to participate meaningfully without overextending herself. The beacon lighting ceremony became particularly symbolic of the Queen's comeback narrative. The moment when she touched the globe that sent the lighting signal around the world represented not just the reach of her influence, but the continued vitality of her connection to the Commonwealth realms. The coordination required for the simultaneous lighting of over 3,000 beacons demonstrated the organizational capabilities that remained at her disposal despite concerns about her declining capacity. Celebrity performances throughout the concert provided additional context for understanding the Queen's renewed energy. Major stars who had worked with the royal family over the decades noted the Queen's obvious enjoyment of the performances and her quick wit during backstage interactions. These informal observations from entertainment industry figures who had no political reason to exaggerate painted a picture of a monarch who was genuinely thriving rather than simply enduring the celebrations. The Jubilee pageant on June 5th provided the grand finale that showcased the full extent of the Queen's remarkable recovery. Her final balcony appearance, surrounded by working members of the royal family, became the defining image of the entire celebration. The Queen's obvious pleasure in the crowd's enthusiastic response and her animated interactions with family members presented a stark contrast to the isolated figure who had sat alone at Prince Philip's funeral just over a year earlier. The pageant itself reflected months of detailed planning that had required the Queen's continued engagement with complex logistical challenges. The coordination of military units, community groups, and international participants demanded the kind of sustained attention that would have been impossible for someone experiencing significant cognitive decline. The seamless execution of such a massive undertaking served as implicit evidence of the Queen's continued operational effectiveness. Behind-the-scenes accounts of the Jubilee celebrations revealed the extent to which the Queen had personally shaped every aspect of the four-day celebration. From selecting the specific pieces performed by military bands to approving the final lineup of pageant participants, she had maintained the hands-on approach that had characterized her management of royal events throughout her reign. This level of detailed involvement contradicted speculation about her stepping back from active leadership of royal activities. The international participation in Jubilee events also reflected the Queen's continued diplomatic effectiveness. Leaders from around the world attended celebrations not out of mere politeness, but because they recognized her ongoing influence in international affairs. The Commonwealth realms, in particular, used the Jubilee as an opportunity to reaffirm their relationships with the Crown, relationships that remained personally meaningful to the Queen despite her advanced age. Public reaction to the Jubilee celebrations exceeded all expectations in terms of both participation and enthusiasm. Street parties throughout Britain attracted record numbers of participants, while television audiences for major events reached levels not seen since royal weddings of previous decades. The genuine affection displayed by crowds wherever the Queen appeared suggested a population that was not ready to say goodbye to their longtime monarch. The success of the Jubilee had lasting effects on public perception of the Queen's capabilities and intentions. Media coverage shifted dramatically from speculation about retirement to admiration for her continued vitality. Opinion polls showed increased support for the Queen personally and growing confidence in the monarchy's future under her continued leadership. Perhaps most significantly, the Jubilee demonstrated the Queen's sophisticated understanding of her role's symbolic importance during times of national uncertainty. The celebrations provided a unifying focus for a country dealing with economic challenges, political instability, and ongoing recovery from the pandemic. Her visible strength and engagement offered reassurance that some institutions remained stable and reliable despite rapid changes in other areas of national life. The Platinum Jubilee became more than a celebration. It became proof that the Queen's apparent decline in 2021 had been temporary rather than permanent. The woman who emerged from the four-day celebration was clearly not ready to step aside, but was instead preparing to continue serving with renewed energy and purpose. The stage was set for the final phase of a reign that refused to end quietly. January 2022 marked a turning point that no one saw coming. While the British press continued their speculation about the Queen's possible retirement, and palace officials quietly prepared for various succession scenarios, Queen Elizabeth II was making a decision that would reshape the narrative of her final years and demonstrate the true meaning of royal determination. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but those closest to the Queen began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor as the new year began. The woman who had seemed to withdraw into herself following Prince Philip's death was slowly emerging with a renewed sense of purpose that surprised even her most loyal staff members. It began with small things: longer meetings with her private secretaries, more detailed questions about upcoming engagements, and a return of the sharp attention to detail that had characterized her approach to royal duties for 7 decades. Lady Susan Hussey, one of the Queen's longest-serving ladies-in-waiting, later recalled that the change became apparent during a private conversation in early January. The Queen, who had been uncharacteristically quiet and introspective since Philip's death, suddenly began discussing plans for her Platinum Jubilee celebrations with an enthusiasm that hadn't been seen in months. More remarkably, she wasn't talking about the Jubilee as a farewell celebration, but as a foundation for continued service. The Queen's personal physician, Professor Sir Hugh Thomas, played a crucial role in this remarkable turnaround. Rather than simply managing the Queen's health issues, he worked with her to develop a comprehensive wellness program that would enable her to continue her duties while acknowledging the physical limitations that came with age. This wasn't about pretending she was decades younger, but about maximizing her capacity to serve within realistic parameters. The medical team's approach was revolutionary in its acceptance of the Queen's unwavering commitment to her role. Instead of recommending retirement or a dramatic reduction in duties, they focused on adapting her schedule and working methods to accommodate her physical needs while maintaining her essential functions as monarch. This included everything from ergonomic adjustments to her workspace to carefully timed rest periods that would allow her to maintain energy for public appearances. Perhaps the most significant factor in the Queen's comeback was her personal decision to reframe her grief as motivation rather than limitation. Palace insiders reported that she began speaking about honoring Prince Philip's memory through continued service, rather than withdrawing from the public life they had shared. This psychological shift transformed her perspective on aging and loss, turning what could have been reasons to step back into compelling arguments for pressing forward. The Queen's approach to overcoming the challenges of 2021 revealed the sophisticated understanding of duty that had sustained her throughout her reign. She recognized that her role as monarch wasn't simply about personal preference or comfort, but about providing stability and continuity for the nation during uncertain times. The COVID-19 pandemic had already disrupted so much of British life that the additional uncertainty of royal transition could create unnecessary anxiety for a population still recovering from global upheaval. Her decision to continue was also influenced by her deep understanding of the monarchy's constitutional role. The Queen had spent decades mastering the delicate balance required to maintain the crown's relevance in a democratic society. She understood better than anyone that the institution's survival depended not on tradition alone, but on demonstrated value to contemporary British life. A retreat from public duties, however, understandable given her age and recent losses, could signal that the monarchy was becoming ceremonial rather than functional. The planning for her Platinum Jubilee became the vehicle through which the Queen's renewed energy manifested. Rather than treating the celebration as a retrospective tribute to past achievements, she approached it as an opportunity to demonstrate continued vitality and relevance. The careful coordination required for such a massive undertaking provided her with the structure and purpose that had always energized her approach to royal duties. Palace staff were amazed by the Queen's hands-on involvement in Jubilee preparations. The woman who had seemed to be stepping back from detailed oversight was suddenly reviewing every aspect of the celebrations, from the guest list for major events to the specific timing of balcony appearances. Her legendary attention to detail, which some had worried might be diminishing, returned with full force as she ensured that every element of the Jubilee would reflect her vision of the monarchy's continued importance. The Queen's renewed engagement with her role extended far beyond Jubilee planning. She began requesting more frequent briefings on government business, showing increased interest in the domestic and international challenges facing Britain. Her weekly audiences with the Prime Minister, which had become somewhat routine after decades of practice, regained the focused intensity that had characterized them during earlier crises in her reign. International diplomacy became another area where the Queen's revitalized approach became evident. She understood that her unique position as the world's longest-serving head of state gave her unparalleled influence in global affairs. Rather than reducing her involvement in international relations, she began using her status more strategically, recognizing that her advanced age actually enhanced rather than diminished her diplomatic value. The Commonwealth realms, in particular, benefited from the Queen's renewed focus. Her role as head of state for multiple nations had sometimes been taken for granted, but the uncertainty surrounding her health had reminded these countries of the stability she provided. Her decision to actively engage with Commonwealth affairs, despite the physical demands of such involvement, strengthened relationships that might otherwise have been strained by succession uncertainty. The Queen's family played a crucial supporting role in her remarkable comeback. Rather than pressuring her to step back, they adapted their own roles to provide additional support while respecting her determination to continue. Prince Charles, as heir apparent, fine-tuned his own activities to complement rather than replace his mother's work. Prince William and Catherine took on additional responsibilities that allowed the Queen to focus her energy on the duties that only she could perform. This family coordination demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of royal duties that the Queen had instilled in the younger generation. Rather than viewing her continued activity as an obstacle to their own advancement, they recognized that her experience and constitutional knowledge remained invaluable resources for the monarchy's future success. The Queen's approach to technology during this period also revealed her adaptability and determination to remain relevant. While she had initially been reluctant to embrace digital communication during the pandemic, she now began using video calls and other technological tools not just as emergency measures, but as permanent additions to her methods of conducting royal business. This technological adaptation allowed her to maintain contact with a broader range of organizations and individuals than would have been possible through traditional methods alone. Media relations underwent a similar transformation during the Queen's comeback period. Instead of allowing speculation about her health and intentions to dominate coverage, Palace communications staff began more proactive management of her public image. This included carefully planned appearances that showcased her continued competence while acknowledging the practical accommodations required by her age. The psychological impact of the Queen's decision to continue rather than retreat extended far beyond the royal family. For many Britons, particularly those of her generation who had lived through similar losses and health challenges, her example became a powerful demonstration that aging didn't necessarily mean withdrawal from meaningful activity. Her refusal to be defined by limitations resonated with a population that was itself grappling with an aging demographic. The Queen's comeback also had significant constitutional implications that weren't immediately apparent to casual observers. Her continued activity maintained the stability of established governmental processes while allowing time for gradual adaptation to eventual succession. This approach prevented the abrupt transitions that had characterized some historical periods of royal change, providing continuity that benefited both domestic governance and international relations. As the early months of 2022 progressed, the evidence of the Queen's remarkable recovery became increasingly apparent to those who observed her closely. The woman who had seemed diminished by age and loss was clearly rebuilding not just her energy, but her sense of purpose and determination. The stage was being set for a demonstration of royal resilience that would surprise even those who thought they knew the Queen's character intimately. What emerged from this period of renewal was not simply a return to previous form, but an evolution that incorporated the wisdom gained from recent challenges while maintaining the essential qualities that had defined her reign. The Queen was preparing to show the world that true strength isn't about avoiding adversity, but about how gracefully and effectively one responds to it. The morning of April 9th, 2021, dawned gray and somber over Windsor Castle, matching the mood that would soon engulf the entire British Commonwealth. Queen Elizabeth II woke to a world that had fundamentally changed overnight. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, her husband of 73 years, and the man who had been her constant companion through 7 decades of royal duty, had passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 99. For most people, such a devastating loss would mark the beginning of a quiet retreat from public life. For a 94-year-old widow, it would seem natural to step back, to grieve privately, and to let younger family members take the helm. But Queen Elizabeth II had never been most people, and this moment would test every ounce of the legendary resilience that had carried her through the abdication crisis of her uncle, World War II, the dissolution of the British Empire, and countless personal and political storms. The death of Prince Philip wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the removal of the Queen's greatest source of strength and stability. Behind the scenes, palace staff who had served the royal couple for decades watched in concern as the monarch faced her first major crisis without her closest advisor. Philip had been more than a husband. He had been her anchor in the turbulent waters of royal life, the one person who could speak to her with complete honesty, and the source of the dry humor that had helped her navigate the most challenging moments of her reign. In the days following Philip's death, the Queen displayed the composure that had become her trademark, but those closest to her noticed subtle changes. The woman who had always carried herself with military precision seemed to move a little more slowly. Her legendary appetite for the daily red boxes filled with government documents appeared to wane. For the first time in her long reign, palace staff began to worry that perhaps the unthinkable was happening. Perhaps the Queen was finally showing her age. The funeral of Prince Philip on April 17, 2021, provided the world with one of the most poignant images in recent royal history. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, the ceremony was limited to just 30 people, a fraction of what would normally attend a royal funeral of such magnitude. The Queen sat alone in St. George's Chapel, a solitary figure in black, separated from her family by pandemic protocols that treated even the monarch like any other grieving widow. The image of her sitting alone, masked and maintaining perfect posture despite her overwhelming grief, became symbolic of the collective loss experienced during the pandemic. But for those who knew her best, it represented something more troubling. The Queen looked diminished, not just by grief, but by the weight of carrying on alone after more than 7 decades of partnership. In the weeks that followed, concerning signs began to multiply. The Queen, who had only canceled a handful of engagements in her entire reign due to illness, began experiencing what palace officials diplomatically termed mobility issues. Her signature walkabouts became shorter and less frequent. The woman who had famously never complained about anything was overheard expressing fatigue to her staff. The British press, usually respectful in their coverage of the monarch, began to shift their tone. Tabloids that had once focused on royal scandals and family drama suddenly found themselves writing speculative pieces about succession planning and the possibility of retirement. The broadsheet newspapers, typically more reserved, began publishing thoughtful retrospectives about the Queen's reign, pieces that read suspiciously like obituary preparations. Behind palace walls, conversations that had once been unthinkable were now occurring with increasing frequency. Senior courtiers who had spent decades avoiding any mention of the Queen stepping down were quietly discussing transition plans. Government officials began reviewing constitutional procedures that hadn't been examined since the Queen's accession to the throne in 1952. Even within the royal family, there were whispered discussions about whether it might be time for the Queen to consider a different kind of service to the nation. The Queen herself seemed aware of these conversations, though she gave no public indication of her thoughts on the matter. Those who had worked with her for decades noted that she appeared more reflective than usual, spending longer periods in private contemplation and showing less of the quick wit and sharp observations that had made her such an effective monarch. The summer of 2021 brought additional challenges that seemed to compound the Queen's difficulties. Health scares that would have been minor inconveniences for a younger person became matters of serious concern when they affected a 95-year-old monarch. A brief hospital stay in October, initially described as routine tests, sparked renewed speculation about her ability to continue her demanding schedule of royal duties. The cancellation of several high-profile engagements, including the Remembrance Day service at the Cenotaph, sent shockwaves through the British establishment. The Queen had attended this somber ceremony honoring fallen soldiers almost every year since becoming monarch, and her absence was interpreted by many as a sign that her active reign might be drawing to a close. Media coverage during this period reflected a nation grappling with the possibility of losing the only monarch most Britons had ever known. Television documentaries about her reign multiplied, each one feeling like a tribute to an era that was ending. Bookstores filled with biographies and retrospectives, as if the country was collectively trying to capture and preserve the essence of a reign that had defined British identity for generations. International observers watched these developments with particular interest. The Queen had been a constant on the world stage for so long that foreign leaders struggled to imagine British politics without her steady presence. Commonwealth nations, many of which had gained independence during her reign while maintaining her as their head of state, began their own quiet preparations for what could be a fundamental shift in their relationship with Britain. The Queen's reduced public appearances created a vacuum that highlighted just how central she had become to British public life. Events that had always featured royal participation felt incomplete without her presence. The careful choreography of state occasions, perfected over decades, suddenly seemed fragile when performed without the monarch who had been their centerpiece for so long. During this challenging period, palace staff noticed that the Queen spent increasing amounts of time in her private apartments, reviewing photo albums and correspondence from earlier decades. She seemed to be taking stock of her long life of service, perhaps weighing whether she had given enough to the nation she had promised to serve until her death. The woman who had never shown uncertainty in public appeared to be privately grappling with questions that had no easy answers. As 2021 drew to a close, the British public found themselves in the unprecedented position of genuinely wondering whether their monarch might step aside. Polls showed that while most Britons still supported the Queen personally, many were beginning to accept that age and grief might finally force her to reduce her role or even abdicate in favor of her son, Charles. The stage was set for what many expected to be a graceful withdrawal from public life, a well-deserved retirement for a woman who had given everything to her country. The world was prepared for a queen who would fade gently into history, remembered fondly but no longer the vital force she had once been. No one, not even those closest to her, anticipated what would happen next. The woman who had seemed diminished by age and loss was about to remind the world why she had earned the crown in the first place, and why she had no intention of giving it up without one final, spectacular demonstration of the royal will that had sustained the British monarchy through its greatest challenges. The storm had battered the crown, but it had not broken it. What emerged from that difficult year would be not a defeated queen ready for retirement, but a monarch reborn, ready to show the world that true resilience isn't about avoiding the storms of life, but about how magnificently you sail through them in the darkest hour of her 70-year reign, when the world whispered that perhaps the longest-serving monarch in British history had finally met her match. Queen Elizabeth II did something that stunned even her closest advisors. At 95 years old, after facing a year that would have broken spirits half her age, she walked back into the public eye with a smile that seemed to say, "Did you really think a few storms could topple a crown that has weathered 7 decades?" The year 2021 had been merciless. The death of Prince Philip, her companion of 73 years, left her sitting alone at his funeral, a solitary figure in black that became the defining image of pandemic grief. Health scares forced her to cancel engagements for the first time in decades. Palace walls echoed with whispers of succession plans and retirement discussions. The British press, usually reverent, began writing retrospectives as if her chapter was closing. But what happened next would remind the world why she earned the title of the longest reigning British sovereign in history. Instead of retreating into the comfortable shadows of semi-retirement, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor emerged with a vigor that defied every expectation, every age-related limitation, and every doubt about her capacity to continue serving. This is not just a story about a queen returning to her duties. This is the extraordinary tale of a woman who redefined what it means to be resilient, who showed the world that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how majestically you rise when everyone expects you to stay down. What you're about to discover will change how you think about perseverance, duty, and the incredible power of the human spirit when it refuses to surrender to circumstances that would defeat ordinary mortals. This is the untold story of the greatest comeback in royal history.